Hi, my name is Oneya Okuwobi. I serve as Director of Cultural Inclusion at People's Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. I also lead city cohorts for the Mosaix Global Network. And finally, I am a PhD student in sociology at The Ohio State University. A few months ago, our church was having a series on kings, and two particular kings were enthralling to me. One was Josiah, the young king who rebuilt the temple and restored worship in the kingdom of Judah during his time. Another one was King Herod, who many of us know from the Christmas story, but who also undertook such a big rebuilding project of the temple that it was at times called the Temple of Herod. Two kings rebuilding the temple, but two very different perspectives on them. You see, one was called holy and a man after God's own heart, and the other one is looked back in history as despicable. The difference between them, I believe, is that Josiah, before he rebuilt the temple, he tore down the high places of false worship. Herod, on the other hand, had no such ideas. His rebuilding of the temple was about his worship. It was about pleasing the authorities and making himself look good. In fact, he levied heavy taxes on the people of Israel in order to build those temples. When we're rebuilding the multi-ethnic church, and by multi-ethnic church, I mean a church that has no more than 80% representation from any given group, I believe in a lot of ways we are rebuilding the temple of the Lord. You see, 1 Corinthians 3:17 tells us that we together are God's temple. A lot of times we use the verses about God's temple individualistically, but we have to realize that it includes all of us. We together are God's temple, and when we bring together every tribe, tongue, and nation, we are rebuilding the temple of God the way it was intended to be in the New Testament. Another example of this is in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one, and destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity, thus making peace. We're rebuilding the temple when we get rid of the barriers of human origin and bring together people to make one out of many. But if we're rebuilding the temple and the multi-ethnic church, what are the high places? Well, I believe those high places are the residue of racial inequality. Now, some of you right now just wanted to turn off when I said racial inequality. Because when you think about racial inequality, you think about the residues of our past, you think about the historical box of grievances that we bring to the forefront when we talk about issues of race. And I'm just wanting to say that we can't continue to look at it that way. That when we look at the people of Israel, they would often go over their history, both the good and the bad. And they did that for a simple reason, to remember where God was at work. And so that they wouldn't repeat the bad things of their history, that they would be able to move forward with strength. I say the same thing to us today. When we deal with and look at issues of race, we can move forward in strength. And race is a very present reality in our country. America is what sociologists would call a racialized society. What that means is race matters fundamentally for life chances of folks born in this country. I'll give you one very small example. Loan rates on an auto loan. If I, as a black female, were to go into a bank and desire an auto loan, and I had the exact same credit score, similar income, and similar occupation to a white female, on average, I would receive a higher interest rate just because of my race. Now, when we look at those things that are continuing to occur, we can see this effect of race occurring in many different aspects of American life. It's more than just loan rates. It goes all the way from health and life expectancy to the levels of respect people receive when they talk, to the amount of income you can expect to receive based on your education level. Race matters for life chances in the United States. And again, this can seem very hard to believe, but I think one of the core reasons why it seems hard to believe is because we don't understand what race is in this country. Because we've spent so long talking about diversity, which is a beautiful thing, of all of us wanting to come together and bring our unique strengths to be one nation united, we don't talk about race, which is something entirely different. Race is a hierarchy created to justify inequality. Now that sounds like a lot of words. Let me try to break it down a little bit. What race means is that as a majority member of our culture, as a white member in society, it's almost as though you were born on a little platform and people of color were born on the ground level. What this means is that as you go through life and as you take on different roles and different aspects, your performance and who you are is going to be judged superior than people of color just because of your physical appearance. Now, this doesn't mean several things. One of the things it doesn't mean is that you're up on this platform because there is hate in your heart or because you're looking down on the people on the ground level. It has absolutely nothing to do with individual attitudes. The other thing that it doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that a person on a platform has to feel guilty about that. That is the way our society is set up and structured. It's something that we need to recognize and we want to work to deal with, but we don't need to feel guilty about our relative position in it. The third thing that it doesn't mean is that if you were born on this platform that you don't have disadvantage in other areas of your life. If you were born white and male, sure, those are two platforms of hierarchy that you were born on the platform on. But you may have been born into a poor family. That too is a source of disadvantage. It doesn't negate the idea that you may have racial or gender privilege, but it also doesn't get rid of the disadvantage that you have based on your socioeconomic birth order. So realizing that there are these platforms that exist of a racialized society in America, how are we seeing that come into the church? Well, I'll give you one clear example. The number of multi-ethnic churches, and I mentioned earlier that's those churches that don't have more than 80% representation of any group, it has doubled since the year 2000. In the year 2000, we were only at 7% of churches being integrated. Now we're at more than 14% of churches that are no longer segregated by race. The reason why we see the structures of race in that, even though we are celebrating that amazing accomplishment, is because within that change, what we are seeing is people of color coming under white leadership in white congregations. While the number of multi-ethnic churches has doubled, the number of majority-minority congregations or congregations led by minorities that are multi-ethnic has not changed. So we're not seeing mutual submission within the Church of Jesus Christ. We're seeing one-way submission based on the structures and powers of race. Another thing that we're seeing in the multi-ethnic church that we don't want to continue to see is that families are very happy to be part of a multi-ethnic church. They love the fact that their kids play together and pick up different cultures and different foods. But when those same children get to dating age, families tend to leave the multi-ethnic churches for homogenous churches. And why? Because those are the ages when relationships could start with somebody of another race or ethnicity. We're perfectly happy with worshiping together, but we don't see each other as equals enough that we really want to be part of each other's family. And why should we care that these hierarchies of race are coming into the church? Well, two important reasons. One is that I said earlier, we are rebuilding the temple. When we rebuild the temple, we want our studs to be strong. We don't want anything to lead to its collapse. And when you have a person on this level and a person on this level trying to form a bond together, well, that bond is weakened by the hierarchies of race. We need equal relationships so that when we build new bonds in this rebuilt temple, that we build a temple so strong that the gates of hell will not be able to prevail against it. The other reason why this is critically important is because God created us each in his own image. So when we rebuild the temple and allow these hierarchies of race to continue, then we are denigrating the image of God in people who don't have this platform of privilege. We have to make sure that we're all on an equal playing field to fully represent each of us being humanity in the image of God. And that makes me think. We often think about the high places as just places of idol worship, and that is true. But importantly, they were places where Israel took the outside culture into their culture. When we as a church allow these structures and hierarchies of race that we've pulled in from society to remain within our churches, we're taking the outside and we're bringing it in, and we're reflecting the world's culture more than we're reflecting Christ. So what are some of the things that we can do in order to solve this issue, in order to demolish the high places? Well, I would say the first thing that we should do is we should take a bold stand. An issue that has been dividing and causing trouble in some churches recently is the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, I know that a movement like this can be controversial, but what I would say to you is you do not have to agree on every single thing that the movement stands for. What I would say is that it is a social fact that black males are 21 times more likely than white males to be shot and killed by the police. If we believe that is an injustice, then we can stand up for Black Lives Matter without it taking away from who we are or any of the things that we believe. We can just stand up and say, I see an injustice and I'm willing to take a stand, even though it might cost me personally. The second thing that we should do is we should address inequality when we see it. If, for example, you are at a conference and all of the speakers of the conference are white males, you might suggest, are there female voices that we need to be hearing from? Are there people of color that we need to be hearing from? And make your voice heard. If the conference continues not to meet those needs, then perhaps you might consider going to a different conference. The same is true with your personal meetings. If you're in a position of influence and you're going to an important meeting in the city, and you show up and there are only one type of people there, you might think about whom else do I need to bring along to be part of this conversation, and opt yourself out of the conversation until everybody who needs to be there is represented. When we start to level these hierarchies of inequality, we start to build a church where it doesn't seem strange that we have as much Latino leadership as we have white leadership, that we have as much female leadership as we have male leadership. And the third thing that we need to do is we need to realize our high calling. We are not called not to hate, we are called to love. A lot of times we'll say that we are working on this issue of race because we don't have hate in our heart or we don't have prejudice in our heart. And that's good. And that is important. But that's just the calling of a normal human being, to not be hateful. Christians have a much higher calling, and as Christ followers, we're called to love. That means sacrificing our position in order to say, when I'm put on a platform, I'm going to step off my platform to make sure I'm not causing a divide between myself and my brothers and sisters. I'm speaking to you today as a black female, and so that means I don't have privilege in either of those vectors. But what I do have is a middle-class upbringing. What I do have is a graduate school education. If I'm not looking at myself and saying, those are areas of privilege for me that not everybody gets to have, and I'm not using my privilege in order to bring speaking opportunities and platforms to others who deserve it, who don't have that privilege, well then, it's not something I deserve to continue to have. So in closing, I would say, the multi-ethnic church is a beautiful church, an expression of who God is, and a way that we can reflect together the variegated wisdom of God. But in order for us to rebuild the temple that is strong, we need to tear down these high places of racial inequality. I believe that together, when we're all on the same level playing field, we'll be able to do more, and we will be the first organization in which the world can see these structures of race turned on their heads, and the church will be creating a completely new thing. The church will be the church that Jesus died for.